Alrighty. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Good to have you with us. We've got quite a bit to get through today, so let's get started. Today is all about the Eloqua email editors, and we figured this was kind of a back to basics. We've got a number of new clients across the region, most of those who have attended training, but it's always good to do a little bit of a refresh to go back to the basics. It's considering the email editor is obviously one of the largest pieces of Eloqua that you're going to be using on a regular basis. So let's dive in. My name is Derek Bell. I'm the Customer Success and Marketing Director at Marketing Cube. We host this webinar each month for clients and friends, so we're glad to have you with us. Also on the line is Jason O'Donnell, one of our account directors. So Jason handles the chat function for us. Sometimes I can get a bit distracted as I'm talking. So if you do have questions throughout today's webinar, please use the chat function, and Jason can bring those to my attention, and we'll be sure to try and get those answers to you today. So what's on the agenda for today? So a number of things. First of all, what we wanted to do is to provide you with a little bit of an overview of these two options that you have in Eloqua when you're building emails. We also wanted to share with you some specific examples, some of the more common service requests that we get from customers. We've read through those. Some of them are reasonably bespoke, etc. It was kind of hard to actually find the most common, but I've listed some of them, and the ones that are more common I'll identify. Some that are a little bit more obscure, I'll identify those as we share them with you. Then what we're going to do is actually dive into the editor itself and have a look at each of the various areas of the editor so that you're clear as to what's available and what the various options are for you to play with. And then looking at release 19D, which is due in November this year. So there's quite a bit coming, and then also quite a bit coming in 20A. Don't have all those details yet, but we certainly do have details for release 19D, which is the final release for 2019. So let's jump in and have a look at an overview just to give you some context so that we get some clarity in relation to how you're able to build emails in Eloqua. And look, the upside is the big plus is that you've got options. So if you're unable to spell HTML a little bit like me, that's fine. You're covered. You've got the design editor to help you with that. But of course, there are many amongst us who love HTML and wouldn't kind of dream of probably using anything else. And so that's okay too. You're covered as well. So they're essentially the two options that you have. And so with the source editor, you can create the email from scratch directly within Eloqua using HTML, or you can even build it externally. So you may have an external application of some sort, Dreamweaver, or you may be working with business partners doing some joint campaigns. They may provide you with content or emails or landing pages, the same thing actually. So in that case, if they provide you with a zip file with all of the relevant assets that are required, you can actually just upload that zip file directly into Eloqua. Now, the output of what you upload will be a source editor email, not a design editor email. And the other thing to have clarity around is that when you build something in the source editor, you can't then save it over to the design editor and vice versa. So if you start creating the email in the design editor, it remains in the design editor. So you can't go from the design editor and then move it over to becoming an HTML email. But the nice thing about the design editor is we sort of identified some of the key points there. It's a drag and drop functionality. You can add snippets of HTML code should you need to, or should you like to, that's fine. The default output of the design editor is that it produces a responsive email. So you don't have to worry about that code. It will look beautiful on a mobile device, iPad or pad or iPad of some sort, obviously on desktop, etc., and in web-based emails. So let's have a close look at what they look like in Eloqua. So what we're looking at right here is an example of the source editor. So when we use the word source editor, what we're referring to is source code, so HTML essentially. And so this is one way that you can view that information in the source editor with the email on the left-hand side and the supporting code on the right-hand side. Now, there are different ways that you can write the HTML in order to make it easier for non-HTML people to actually interact. So for example, I've seen some customers where they'll build the email, but they can't do anything on the left-hand side of the screen. all of the editing has to be done in the code on the right-hand side. So that just simply shows a little bit of an experience with HTML from an Eloqua point of view. Like all email marketing and marketing automation platforms, the HTML is a little bit bespoke for each provider and each platform, and Eloqua is no different from that point of view. But once you understand how to build HTML for Eloqua, then you can actually produce and make templates that are easier for non-HTML users to play with. And prior to the design editor, this was kind of where I would spend most of my time. But I always found some little limitations, and then if I couldn't quite do something, I had to go and get the geniuses upstairs to help me with a little bit of coding, etc. Whereas I find I have a great deal more autonomy now with the design editor. Okay, so what we're looking at there is the source editor. So the source editor, as we talked about, it's all about basically writing code. It can be uploaded. You can modify that code. You can pretty much do whatever you need to do from that point of view. And to a degree, much of what we talk about here from an email point of view using the source editor is actually the same for for the landing page editor as well. So the landing page editor in Eloqua produces the option of either a source editor or the design editor. So very similar in functionality and the way you actually use them. Now, you'll find lots of information in the Eloqua Help Center. If you're new to Eloqua and you do want to use the HTML coding, you can certainly do that. And if you search in the Help Center for HTML emails, you'll arrive at a series of screens, and this one will bring you to HTML emails. I'll just zoom in a bit there for you. So it essentially will give you a range of different pieces you can head off to. So once you understand and love HTML, all of this is going to make a lot more sense to you. So you'll see there are CSS recommendations. It says, avoid using the following class names, for instance. So again, if you understand that, that's fantastic. But you've got a lot of information there and some examples, etc., and lots of hyperlinks to head off in different directions. So a good starting point is go to the Help Center and search for HTML emails, and you'll find a whole range of resources there to help you. Then, as we said there on the left-hand side, depending on how you build those emails, people that don't have HTML skills can actually still get in there and do some editing as well. So that's something to think about. If you need a hand with that, just simply contact the Marketing Cube support team and they can assist you with that as well. Then the other option you have is the design editor. So this is the drag and drop interface and relatively HTML-free experience. So again, just wanted to show you those two screenshots so you're crystal clear on which of the two we're talking about. Much of what we'll talk about today will be around the design editor as well. So what does the design editor do? Well, it's essentially, there's really no loss in functionality as we've described there. It enables you to do a whole range of different things. One of the key things that you can do is to explore the different width of emails. Now, initially, I kind of thought, well, everything's always 600. We've always done 600 wide emails. Why would we necessarily need to change that? Well, after we thought about it a bit further and actually looked at some of the stats in relation to where our customers and those people we talk to on a regular basis are opening our emails, it's generally on a desktop, not on a mobile device. So while we always think mobile first in relation to what we design and what we do, we've decided to make 756 pixels our default width in emails. The reason being that when you look at a 600 wide email on most desktop email clients, there's just a lot of white space on either side. So that means there's lost real estate that could be used in the design and obviously trying to get your message across. So that's what we've elected to do. I'm not sure about 900 or 1080. That just feels kind of a bit crazy. But keeping in mind, the output is responsive. So even if somebody does access that content on a mobile device, that's okay. It will respond and render beautifully on that as well. The other upside that I found with the design editor is it is easier for me to add shared and dynamic content to my emails than it was previously using the HTML or source editor. And that just comes down to experience. It's, HTML is not my thing, so I'm really enjoying getting a lot more use out of shared and dynamic content as well, which is good. So once you understand what you're doing in the email design editor, the nice thing is it's actually a really simple leap to go over to landing pages as well, because the landing page design editor is really pretty much the same thing. So that's just to give you an overview of the two editors, the source editor and also the design editor. Now, let's have a look at some of these common service requests that we've got. So what I've done is just sort of literally read through the individual cases, have a look at what people are asking about, etc., some of the resolutions that people have provided. So Cameron has a question. When using 756 pixels as your default width, have you noticed any improvements in rendering with any email clients? Or alternatively, have you noticed that you minimize the number of emails that are shortened in the default? You know what, Cameron, I haven't specifically, especially on your second point there. Yeah, no, I haven't specifically noticed that. In relation to the width, we did some testing with Litmus and found no issues or challenges in relation to the rendering. So from that point of view, I've been confident to sort of stick with that 756. But we was actually using the Eloqua dashboards in relation to devices, telling us what people, or telling us which devices people are on when they open our emails, which was part of the reason we decided to run with 756 as the default, largely because people are on their desktops, right? They're, for us at least, they're not necessarily always on mobile. So hopefully that helps a little bit in answering that question for you. All right, so common service requests. So keeping in mind the service requests that we get from customers will relate to both source and design editors. Now, from an HTML code point of view, that was probably one of the most significant questions that people had. And the vast majority of those questions came in the context of the source editor. Now, there are still some HTML requirements around the design editor when we look at things like footers, shared content and dynamic content. There doesn't always have to be, but in many cases there can be, and there is. So in some cases we found where people had potentially maybe taken some templated footers, for example, altered some code, and then found that it wasn't rendering as they expected. So our team was able to go in, help just sort of tidy up a little bit of that HTML code for them in order to get that to render. Now, most of the rendering issues always relate to Outlook, whether it's Outlook desktop or Outlook web browsers, etc. Outlook always seems to be the #1 challenge. So fingers crossed, Microsoft might do something about modernizing that particular product. But question from Luke. Hi, Derek. What's the best way to view a report on what device people have viewed your email? So Luke, there's actually a dashboard. If you go into the dashboard area of Eloqua, so don't go into Insight, but into your dashboards, you'll find a dashboard there called Open by Device Metric, or Metrics by Open, I think it is. Let me quickly jump in there for you. Dashboards and open email by device. And so we found this one. Yeah, I mean, we're always thinking mobile first, as we kind of all should be. Eloqua kind of takes the hard work out of that one by helping you produce responsive emails natively, which is nice. But yeah, so top mobile devices, email opens by mail client and by operating system as well. So you can see that's just the last 2 weeks that have been playing there. So we can see, Windows operating system is the big one, followed by Mac, and then sort of, we sort of go down from there essentially. But this information, in concert with what you can get on Google Analytics as well. Google Analytics was the big one as well, which really helped us identify desktop and mobile as well as what's going on here. So yeah, some good information available there for you. Okay, let me get back to the deck. All right. Another question that came in a number of times, I sort of looked at service requests over the last month and a bit, about 6 weeks, I think it was. We had a couple of people asking about how to add the calendar with a .ics file, so that when you send out an event with a reminder, click on the add the calendar function, etc., to have that load. So as far as Eloqua is concerned, that .ics file is just a file that you need to upload into Eloqua. Once you've got that .ics file stored in Eloqua, you then add it to a button just like you would, let me find a button for you. So if we add a button like so, over on the left-hand side of the screen, we would select the hyperlink, which would be a file in storage. Click on the folder icon. And then depending on how organized you are, you might have them stored something like this. So you can see webinars there. I think we've got, yeah, there's a user group folder 2019. Oh, I wondered why that happened. Did anybody else notice that in their calendar? The October reminder in your calendar said September. My apologies. So I saw that myself this morning. I'm like, hang on, what's going on there? Well, that's why. So exactly as you name it, as it sits here in Eloqua, that's what will appear in the person's calendar. So if anybody used that, which I saw a few people use it, my apologies, it should have said October. But yeah, so you just add that essentially, click on it and choose, and it's done. So then you can obviously, add to calendar, make it easy for people, etc., and then you're good to go. Pretty simple process. Then what else did we have? We had, oh, this was an interesting one. So the client had added a piece of dynamic content, which was built in HTML using the dynamic content editor. When they dropped it into the design editor, they then added some additional padding. And what they were seeing was white space. So remember with dynamic content, you've got a default. So if no one meets the criteria, there's a default. And that default can in fact be blank if you need it to be. And so what was happening, because they had added padding above and below the dynamic content, when it came to the scenario that the email was being presented to somebody that should only see the blank section, it was, adding extended space. So the rule there is, or the solution there is, if you're going to add padding, you should add the padding to the dynamic content itself within the dynamic content editor. Don't add padding to it once you drop it into into the design editor, and then add padding above and below. So if you use dynamic content quite a bit, you probably understand what I'm saying. It's a little bit tricky, but yeah, if you need to have a blank section in there, use the dynamic content editor to in fact add the padding that you need. What else was on that list there? Requesting Marketing Cube to unsubscribe a contact. This particular request comes from a client, usually from their legal team. And over the years, I've suggested to them that this would be so much easier if they simply did it themselves. Obviously, we're happy to assist where possible, but it would be fairly instantaneous for them to create a form. Obviously, the end user can click on the hyperlink in your email. I always am a bit dumbfounded by those emails that you might sometimes get saying, please unsubscribe me. I love going back to those people and saying, just click on the link in the footer and you can manage it yourself, but that's okay. So it's a pretty simple process, but in this case, what we could do, and I've suggested a couple of times, is just create a landing page with a form strictly for internal use only, and let the form take care of that. Drop in the email address of the person and the form can globally unsubscribe them. But that's fine. So that's a sampling of some of the information that we get from people. So Cameron has, hi Derek, seeing the topic Outlook rendering just reminded me, if relevant to this month's webinar and time permitting, I'd love to hear any tips or recommendations for managing dark mode versus light mode. Oh yeah, interesting. Noticing more issues these days on iOS and Outlook, especially the mobile app. I'm afraid that would be sort of outside of my area of expertise to really provide you with any direction on that, Cameron, but that does raise a good question. I will go back to our support team and see what I can add to our blog post. So we'll do a blog post as we do each month after these webinars. Jason, maybe if you can help remind me, let's take a look at that and have a chat with the support team to see how things are rendering. I've just had my mobile device, literally, I've got an iPhone with the update, the recent update, about a month or so ago. I was using it in dark mode, and at no time did I find any issues with emails that I was receiving. And for no other reason than just for variety, I changed it about 2 days ago to go back to regular or light mode. And again, have not seen any change or issue with emails. But let me have a chat with the guys and see if that has been an inquiry that's come through, and we'll get something into the blog post to cover that for you. Thanks, Cameron. Alrighty, well, let's jump in now and have a look. I just want to give you some background and context, and we'll jump in and have a look. So one of the key things to remember when you're building your emails in Eloqua is that there are lots of different bits and pieces that you can in fact add to your email. And so what this illustration is trying to show is that within the design editor itself, you've got all of these other components and bits and pieces or assets that you can use to enhance your email. Now, there are some more obvious ones they would use on a probably more regular basis, certainly images, file storage, example, the .ics file, obviously hyperlinks, field merges for personalization, and then always headers and footers. They're kind of the basics. I probably should have added that one there. But part of the process that will make your use and time of using the Eloqua email editor is to work with templates. And so the more templates that you can create, the faster and easier it will be in order for you to have success and get things done quickly and on brand at the same time. So when we're looking at the email home screen within Eloqua, and you can click on Create an Email. From there, the template chooser opens. And from the template chooser, there's a range of options available, which are essentially sort of Eloqua out-of-the-box style experiences, sort of giving you a kickstart instead of starting with a blank page. But you can see here also additional templates that we've added, for instance, that we use within our own system. And so you can sort of work away with those. Now, when you're working with templates, and depending on the size of your organization, somebody really needs to probably own those templates so that if there are branding changes or links need to be updated, for instance, in templates, that somebody should probably own that process within the organization. So I'll leave you to figure out potentially who that might be. Now, the other way to manage those templates, so now for the person who's been nominated to manage the templates, is to come into the Manage Templates area. So the difference here is that it still looks very much the same, and it does, but what we're doing now is we're actually updating and modifying the masters. So if I click through on any of the links or emails at the bottom of the screen here, I'm actually modifying those masters. You can't modify the Eloqua ones, you can just modify those that you've created. Now, the other thing that can be done to help from a branding point of view is to actually lock down certain aspects of the email template in the design editor. So to give you an example, you might want to ensure that where the logo is positioned at the top of an email is consistent. It's always there. No one's going to change it. It mustn't be changed. Therefore, we can lock that down. And therefore, the hyperlink that is installed behind it will always go to the home page, etc., stuff like that. And so you can use this. So this, again, is done through the Manage Templates area of Eloqua, where you can use the protected content option, which you can see the options there on the left-hand side. And so this little padlock will appear in certain areas, giving you an idea as to what can and can't be changed within the relevant emails. Okay. So from a branding consideration point of view, you've probably got two slightly different experiences depending on which of the two editors that you're using. But as I said there, kind of bullet point number 3, all things being equal, there's really no reason why you shouldn't be able to build an email within, say, 30 minutes from a template. If you're accessing it from a template, really, the copy should already have been developed. It's largely about dropping that copy into the email, getting the right images in place, adding the necessary hyperlinks, and you're kind of off and running. So the danger with doing save as is that you will eventually mess up and send wrong links to people or wrong information where you've not quite noticed something. Maybe you didn't scroll down far enough. So the use of templates is a much safer way of doing things. So what can you control in the design editor from a branding point of view? So there are a series of defaults and things that you can choose. So from a text point of view, you can select a typeface or font as a default, also the color and font size, sort of. I'll explain what I mean by sort of in just a moment. Background, you can identify background colors, etc. The canvas color, so that's the canvas is the area with which you're actually building your email on, versus the background color, which is on the left and the right and the top and bottom of the screen. Then the canvas width and also the canvas alignment. So if you're trying to do maybe some tricky little emails that kind of look like they've been sent from Outlook, you might go with a text-based option, which is to have everything aligned over to the left. Standard, of course, is to align to the center, but of course you can align to the right as well. So in some Asian countries, alignment of things is a little bit different from a standard point of view. So you've got options there, and Middle Eastern countries as well. So hyperlink defaults, you can also select a default color. You can go with blue. That seems to be the fairly standard way of doing things. So these are all the defaults that you can select with the design editor, and we'll jump in just a moment and I'll show you each of these. So branding considerations for the source editor, well, it's done quite differently, really. It's all woven into the HTML. Now, the same construct applies from a template point of view. You can create templates with the HTML emails just as you can with the design design editor emails as well. So you've got plenty of options there to choose between the two. But let's actually dive in and have a closer look at each of these. Alrighty, so as a starting point, you would typically arrive at the email screen. And so this is what we were looking at here just a moment ago. We click on create an email. You've got a series of Eloqua provided templates available to you. You can create a blank HTML email, should you want to do that. And then you'll see we've got some templates here that we've created that we use at Marketing Cube. Certainly the user group is one that gets used fairly heavily. So that's how we access those. Now you can go to all files view. Sometimes we find customers get a bit confused. They come to this screen and they won't see some of these branded company options because they've not looked at them previously, because this is the new and recent view. If you go to the all files view, then you can get a little bit closer and start to find all the various bits and pieces. Now, of course, you can view that in a list view as well, versus in a icon view. Then you can also create folders, which these folders are just reflective of the folders that you're seeing here as well. Some are created by us and some are created by Eloqua. So you've got some options there to play with. All right. So once we jump in and we select a particular email, you'll get to choose one of them. There's many you can choose from. What I've tried to do here initially is just select one that is completely generic, just to give you a little bit of a feel for what we can do. So let's start here with the design components and the layout areas. So essentially what happens is you build the email from a layout point of view, then you add the content or the design components to it. So you'll notice when you hover over the email itself, you've got two types of pieces being displayed. There's the design components, which is this sort of purple where it says content. Then you've got the layout section, which is a more slightly orangey colored piece. So what you're able to do there is actually move entire sections around within the email. So you click on the handle here on the left-hand side, and you can move those around. So you can see I can take that and then move it directly up to the top as well. Now this becomes really helpful, especially if you sort of spend some time to do some formatting and editing of maybe this section, perhaps you add buttons, etc., and you want to repeat that whole process. Well, you don't have to actually repeat the whole process. All you need to do is click on the duplicate button. So here on the right-hand side of the layout area, you'll see an option to duplicate. And so there you go. So now you have two layout sections, and should it have been styled, they're completely identical. So that ability to duplicate is at both the layout area, but also the individual content area as well. A good example is buttons. So for instance, depending on your branding, you may add certain information, you want it to be read. Once you click on it, you can then modify the font size, for instance, things like that. You may not want it to be bold, etc. Now, the problem is when you pull in another button from the left-hand side here, from the design components, it's always blue. So what we do is we simply duplicate. So I can duplicate, grab the handle of the content piece, and I can begin to drop those in place. So again, I can just duplicate and drop those in place like so. So using that example, if I get rid of this, I can just use the bin option on that one. Once I do a bit more styling here, so if I want to add some images, you got the ability there to either search the library for images, or you can directly upload an image. So you've got some options. So you can see right there. So this is the search icon on the left-hand side, or browse, and the upload arrow does that. So it goes like so. You can click on this and then access your C drive or your drive to upload a relevant image. So I can go through here and just find a few more images. That looks nice. I think it's Kylie Kwong. Delicious. What else have we got? Let's do some flowers. All right. So now, once you've got these various pieces or content pieces sitting in place, there's a few things you can do. You can, over on the left-hand side, you'll notice that as we click on the various areas of the editor, the menu on the left-hand side actually changes. So here we can see the word button and all of the relevant pieces that I can modify and play with in relation to the button appear right there. So the same is true with the image. So now we're looking at an image. It gives you the size of the image as shown. That's the actual file name that you can see there. Then we have the width and height. So it's 500, so it's square. You can add your alt text there if you wanted to. You can also add a background color. So let me just choose something horrendous. But you'll notice nothing appears yet. That's because the image is covering the full space. So the way I can play with that is to potentially play with padding. So if I add padding at the top or at the bottom, for instance, like so, now it's all a bit over the shop. So what I can do is select the all sides option, which now makes the padding uniform across those different areas. So another way to do it, so say if you went to this trouble of formatting and getting it in the way that you wanted it, what I would normally do is now once I've got that and I'm happy it's formatted how I want and I want it to be the same, I would just duplicate it and bring that across, duplicate that, bring it across, and then I can just simply choose replace. So I go back to my library, like so. Let's choose the Chinese warriors. There we go. So that becomes an easier process. Now, in order to see how this renders from a mobile point of view, we obviously want to make sure that it stacks the right way. So I'm just going to grab some lorem ipsum, like so. Okay, so again, same thing here. What I would do is just delete those to make the process a bit faster. Probably adjust the padding. We go to 20 pixels on either side, and then I can just duplicate that like so. And so if we're making a template, this becomes a much faster and easier process. Now, when this goes to mobile, you want to make sure that it stacks correctly, right? So that the content, button, and then text, and then below that will be the next piece of content, image, blah, blah, blah. So we can flick to mobile view here at the top of the screen, and you can see that that's all stacking correctly. Now, depending on how you build the email, you'll either have success or failure. So let me show you what I mean by that. If you build out this email and you grab 3 here, so we've added a 3-column layout, If you in fact have all of this sitting down here, which is in fact sitting in another layout piece, okay, like so. Okay, so you'll notice now that we've got a layout block here and then another layout block here. So now if I view it in mobile, what's going to happen is I get the 3 images first, then I get the copy. So that's probably not the desired outcome. So if that's happened and you can't quite figure out why, it's because you've got information sitting in 2 layout sections. So the rule of thumb is you want to have, if you want it to stack properly on mobile, then you need to play around with the different layout areas and make sure you've got them all in the right place. Okay, so question from Yulia. Let's have a look. Is it possible to lock the styling of a button so users couldn't add blue buttons instead of red ones? Let me show you an example of how we overcome that. So the strict answer to your question is no, but let me explain how we control that ourselves and make that easier, Yulia. Susan, if you have a link to email someone from an email, can you include text for the subject line? It doesn't seem possible in Eloqua. It is possible, Susan. It just requires you to format the link in a specific way. Let me have a look. If I can find it quickly, I'll show you. If not, I'll try and find it and send it to you. Yeah, here we go. Okay, how do I show this to you easily? It's just essentially you're creating a little bit of code to put in. So that's it there. So so subject equals, enter your subject here. So this is a template that I've used occasionally. I tend not to use it anymore because I'd be more inclined to direct people to a form or personalize the email to come from the person to whom they should be responding to versus clicking on an email address. But if that's what you need to do, something like that would assist you. Is that kind of what you're familiar with, Susan? Oh, there you go. I'm sorry. I'm trying to multitask. I'm seeing in the chat that Cameron's all over it and he's answered the question. Thank you very much, Cameron. So same sort of thing. Cool. All right. Okay, any other questions there? Okay, the styling of the buttons. So let me show you what we do. Yeah, so this is, I'll just zoom out a little bit so we can get a bit more on the screen there for you. So we've created what we call a primary or a master email. And so you'll see this is lorem ipsum all the way through. And we've kind of got our red on white or our white on red or the gray on white, and then just sort of different options in relation to the way it works. So because we use our templates to do just about everything, Yulia, I find I'm never really ever using that function to bring that button in, because if I wanted to change or add another button, I'm just going to simply duplicate one that's already styled in the format that I need. So when I say you can't strictly stop people from creating fluorescent green buttons or bright pink buttons, etc., which you can't do, you can make it a lot easier for them to have access to the right sort of options from a styling point of view. Does that help answer your question? Sorry, now I've got too many windows open. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'll leave Yulia to come back to that one. So the objective of showing you this is how you can produce some templates to help the team essentially have a much easier experience when they come in to build their relevant emails. So the idea with this scenario that we've created is that I would come in here as a user and then determine exactly what it is that I need and what my message is. For instance, do I need 2 big images in this area? Okay, maybe not. So I'm just going to delete those various assets like so. Get those out of the way. Okay, so I don't need those, but maybe I do need this one. If I'm going to go white and then red, so I probably don't want white at the end either, so I can just delete that section like so. Get rid of those bits and pieces. Okay, so I've got, maybe it's a white paper that I'm sharing. Probably don't need multiple calls to action. So I think we'll do an introduction, and then I'll probably just get rid of this section like so. And then either work on, do I need a bit more spacing, whatever, I can sort of finesse that as I go. So what we've tried to do there is just to make it really easy for us to come in, find a format that we want, delete what we don't need, etc., and then sort of get on with the process, essentially. So Yulia, what additional CSS? Okay, yeah. So Yulia then asks, would additional CSS override the styling? Okay, so I'm glad you asked. So the idea by adding CSS to a template, it means that the user doesn't have to worry about any of that. So CSS email, there we go. All right. So customizing design editor emails and landing pages with CSS. So the general rule of thumb here is that you don't want to have to be in a position where users have to remember to add CSS to assets, right? So by adding the CSS at the template level, then the user doesn't have to worry about it. You can see here additional CSS. So the idea would be that you would add any additional CSS you need in here so that when the user accesses the template, so they come in to create an email, they find one of your emails and click on choose. Then when they open it, it's all ready to go. Now, the nice thing is too, that once the CSS is applied, at Marketing Cube, we've elected not to do that with our emails. We just run with Helvetica in our emails. The emails will actually render here in the editor based on the CSS. So this will be a template that you're very familiar with as user group members. You can see it's all kind of there. I've got it kind of built in here with daylight, summertime and standard time, etc. So I just delete the relevant one, and it's all kind of ready to go. In some cases, we remove different assets or add different things, but essentially that's the template that we use. So that's what I mean, Yulia, when I say I don't even bother pulling in buttons really from the design components because they're all in my templates anyway. So we don't have to worry about that. Okay, Jason. Okay, from Ike, is there a way to set up the email so when being forwarded to someone, it doesn't? I wish. Yeah, I'm afraid there is not that I'm aware of. The forwarding of emails is never a superb experience. It's an okay experience, but it's certainly not a superb experience. So I'm afraid, unless I can get some information from, and Jason, maybe you can help me with remembering to check with our support team of developers, unless there's any particular tips that could be offered to improve that experience. But we'll have to come back to you on our blog post on that one. And from Cameron, resetting default fonts. Is there a way to configure a default font when the one you require is not of the standard true type fonts available in the design editor? I know that you can insert code at a component level, but I'm taking more of an overall email level, such as all text boxes. Okay, I believe you can, Cameron. So again, looking at the CSS options that are available through this area, so you can add web fonts. So you can see there's some sample code here to help you do that. So I think what my understanding is that once you add something like this to a template, that it would then override it. The only thing that you need to look at, and maybe there's some additional information on top liners, but our guys, developers certainly have some experience with this, is if you have a lot of people using Outlook to open your emails, there is a slim chance that they'll see everything in Times Roman because Outlook is not the smartest when it comes to rendering these sorts of things. So certainly make sure you do some testing with that application again, which I'll never ever remember for some reason. Thank you, Litmus. I just looked back at your comment earlier. Certainly run it through Litmus and have a look and see what comes back. But landing pages is a lot different. You can have a great deal of control there and a lot more confidence in that what you produce is exactly what's going to display. It's just the emails and primarily around Outlook. So yeah, hopefully you'll find some information here in the Help Center that might answer some of those questions for you. But our support team should be able to assist as well. No problems at all. So there are a few other little bits and pieces that you can play with. So dynamic content can be added. So the idea is that you would build your dynamic content in the dynamic content editor and then access it and find it here. We use dynamic content for a few different things around the user group. One of which is we've set up some dynamic content to show you time zone information, which is here. So the way this one works is that if we know which country you're in, we try and show you the start time of the user group in your local time. And if we don't know which country you're in, then we show you the start time in Australian Eastern Daylight or Standard Time, whichever. And so they can be dropped in like so. So I just simply do a save as of those and change them off each month. So then you can see that information just thinking out different time zones. And the great thing is when you prepare that dynamic content, you can use it either in the email or on a landing page. You don't have to have one for one and one for the other. It's dynamic content. It can be used in either landing pages or emails. So that's good news. The signature is a function that we use quite a bit. So if I drop in a layout piece there and then drop in a signature. So again, I can go to my signature library, find this one is our standard one. It renders like so. I'd probably just add a little bit of padding either side like so, and it displays. So they're all field merges, essentially pulling from the user profile. So that's how they work. The spacer is a good friend. The spacer becomes pretty helpful. Sometimes depending on images and how things render when you go to mobile view, sometimes it can be helpful to add just a little tiny bit of space above here. So if I change that to yellow and just take that back down to 5, it makes things a little bit easier sometimes from a render. You'll know what I mean as you start playing, but I find sometimes that you just need to, because you want consistency in spacing, etc. And so sometimes adding that full width piece across the top, making it the same color can be helpful. Then this is where you access all of your defaults. So if you're building a template and you want all of your fonts to be Helvetica, for example, maybe you don't want a strong black, you want a gray, so you'll see how it's picked up the dynamic content and change that, and all of the fonts here have changed, as well as what's happening here in the signature block as well. So it applies that text default across everything. Now, the question earlier from Julia asked about font size, and I said, well, sort of. So what I mean by sort of is that if you build the font sizes into your template, that does make it easier for users to sort of stay on brand. So let me show you again here. This is our primary template again, as one example. And so, I mean, there are different ways you could do this. I've seen some people do it and they actually write into the template. So it's really clear for people, you know, it's 28 points. This is 22 point, for instance. So you can't hardwire in a single default font size, but you could do something like that, for instance, Julia, which would make it a little bit easier for users. So if they make mistakes or delete it by mistake, at least they can see there it was 28 point if they didn't notice when they hover over it. So from that hovering point of view, you've got the ability to center and bullet points, indentations, personalization, or field merge is available, adding hyperlinks, taking hyperlinks away. There are a range of different options you've got to play with there. Then over here under email settings, sort of the last point to cover here. The email group, as you know, is something as an Eloqua user, you must always apply an email group to an email. The subject line and also preview text. So both of these two areas enable you to personalize them. So if you wanted to have maybe first name in the subject line, you could do something like that. So, you know, John, Mac, or Jack, or Mary, your details have arrived. Like so. And you can do the same in the preview text. There is a limit on the preview text, and I'm wanting to say, I think it is about 200 characters. dump some lore. Yeah, it's 200 characters. So preview text limit is 200 characters. Now, under advanced settings, there's really no reason that you would probably need to play with those. So advanced setting and tracking settings, you could probably leave those as is. No need to really jump into those. Keeping in mind, again, you've always got the ability to go between full and mobile view, so you can have a closer look at what the email is looking like. You do have your undo buttons up here, which can be helpful sometimes to save your bacon. Then you've got all your saving functions, saving as a template once you're ready. You'll need to save it first, but then you can save it as a template once you're happy with that. And then, of course, you can preview and send tests, etc. So that requires you to have saved an email first. So let me pull up an email that we did for in New Zealand last week. So once you've actually saved the email, then you're able to preview it and also send yourself a test. Sending a test is simple. The only key criteria is that the person you're sending the test to needs to be a contact in Eloqua, not a user necessarily, but they must be a contact within Eloqua. So you can select, these are people I'm often sending to, but you can just go ahead and type in the relevant email address of the person. If you want to send it to multiple people, just separate it with a comma. So Derek at marketingcube.com.au, comma, Jason at marketingcube, etc., etc. And then select HTML email and then perform your test and you're ready to rock and roll. Alrighty. So that's kind of a crash course in some of the basic areas and components of the email editor. If you do have any other questions, I'll ask you to use the chat function, but we're just going to quickly jump on to the last section of today's webinar, which is having a quick overview of the upcoming changes in release 19D, which is due in November this year. So let's have a quick look at that. So details are available in Topliners. If you go to Topliners and look for the Oracle Eloqua area specifically and Release Center, that information is available, that hyperlink, that URL. We'll add that to the blog post as well. So you've got that. So what's coming? Authentic contact management. Now this previously was called authenticated microsites. They've gone through a bit of a name change. It's now generally available. Well, sorry, will be generally available in November with release 19D. So essentially what this enables you to do is to provide a secure environment that people have to log into in order to access content. So the industries that would typically find this attractive, certainly financial services, pharmaceutical, anyone that's sort of managing potentially private information or sensitive information, will find this helpful. Keeping in mind that Eloqua is a marketing tool, and generally from a marketing point of view, you're happy for everybody to look at everything, but not always the case with this type of content. So authenticated contact management essentially creates an email group for you. It's a separate microsite, keeps everything tight and secure, and enables people to actually log in with a login and password in order to access specific content. So generally available with release 19D. The ability to replace images is being dramatically enhanced. The key thing is the fact that you should see those changes within 15 minutes. In the past, it has taken significantly longer for the replace image function to actually complete its task. So this is an example of where maybe you've uploaded an image, it's sitting across a number of different email assets, but you've noticed a typo and you're like, oh, do I have to change all those emails? No, you can just go into the library, replace that one image, and then within 15 minutes, all of those assets will be reflected to show the new updated image, for instance. So a function that's always been available, but it's just been improved, which is nice in relation to how quickly it works as well. The search enhancements and changes that you experience with the email editor or email homepage, the ability to search by subject line, for example, those sorts of things, enhanced functionality around that is also being added now to landing pages and forms. So you'll see those changes with release 19D. There's new best practice templates coming. I think, with all due respect to our friends at Oracle, the best practice templates were, I think, from 1942. So it's wonderful that they've refreshed those. and updated those, especially for new clients. I literally had a client ask me just the other day, yeah, it was this week sometime, what sort of templates they had and were available. So they become just a bit of a guide, really, because I think most of the people, when I look at everybody on the call today, really what you're looking at is your own branded solution, right? It's the templates are nice, but they're a starting point, and that's great. It's better than starting from scratch, and it certainly speeds up the process for you. So excited to see those. Now, my understanding is that any of the existing best practice templates that you may have access to, if you want them, or keep them beyond release 19D, just make sure you save as those, this week or next week or before the middle of November, when we'll expect to see the new ones, which will be good. And the SSL enhancements, this is kind of a little bit of a boffin space, but if you are using SSL, which hopefully most of us by now are, Eloqua have made significant changes to the way that we can actually self-manage those certificates directly within Eloqua. In the past, there was a process where you would have to contact support to get certain things done. A lot more of that functionality has now been moved into the platform. So we'll see that for the first time, like you, in November. So if there's anything specific relating to any of your accounts, we'll reach out to you. But I believe one of the other functions is the ability to move certificates potentially from microsite to microsite. In the past, I believe they were fixed together, whereas now you can sort of move them around, which makes it a little bit easier. Something else you would have noticed, and if you're a newer user to Eloqua, sometimes when you create a segment, you'll go into the segment and you may not have touched it for a few days. If you're using filters, which many people are, there's every likelihood that the number of people that you saw in that segment on Monday could in fact now be different if it's more than 24 hours later. So you're just going to get a pop-up on your screen, a little warning message just to remind you that this segment hasn't been refreshed within 24 hours and needs to be. So it's not life-changing, but it's just a really good reminder that what you saw on Monday could in fact now be a little bit different a few days later. So just to keep you aware of that. Cookie lifespan has been reduced to 13 months, largely to support GDPR compliance. Now, the comment from the product team at Eloqua was that they really didn't see a great deal of cookie activity sort of around that 13 months anyway. So generally, you and I as users of the platform, we're not really going to see any difference. It's not really going to change anything in our lives in the way that we segment or build out our various campaigns. As it says there, it's really more to do from a GDPR compliance point of view. Now, one final point for you to be aware of. We had talked earlier in the year about the sunsetting of the classic form editor, and I think there was a little bit of pushback from customers that they weren't quite ready. So thank you to Oracle and Eloqua. They pushed that back, which was good, and it's been pushed back to February. There are some specifics here in relation to how that's going to work, though, which is a little bit different to the sunsetting of the old email editor, for example. So while you won't be able to create new forms using the old editor, your old forms will still be able to be edited, if that makes sense. So you won't be able to copy them. If you do, well, you won't be able to copy them, but you'll be able to do a save as, and the save as will convert them to the new design form. But there are many customers out there with many forms in play, and it just, it takes time to go back and potentially convert them or to rebuild them, etc. So I think there's a nice compromise. So if you do have lots of forms, just be aware that as of February 2020, you won't be able to create new ones in the old editor. Okay, so I don't think that's the end of the world, by the way, because really we should be using the new one. But if you have lots of forms, this becomes probably a little ray of sunshine. So that's good news. So when do the updates take place? They'll take place between the 15th and the 22nd of November. And how to identify your pod number, because when you see the various dates in Topliners, it'll tell you how to find your pod. And your pod is essentially in your URL. So when you've logged into Eloqua, once you're actually logged in, if you have a look at the URL, it's secure.p01 or something else. Most of our Australian clients and New Zealand clients are on pod 7, and you actually go on the 15th of November, as does pod 1. And pods 2, 3, 4, and 6 are a mixture between those, I think. But yeah, most of our clients are pod 1 or pod 7, and a couple on pod 4, I think. So it's all happening. There's lots coming and lots of changes and functionality. Very excited to see a few more things coming down the pipeline for February, and then also potentially release 20B, which will be, what was that, May as well. So as we find out more, we'll let you know. But if you do have any questions, please stay on the line. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. We're 6 minutes over, so thank you so much for your patience. Keep an eye on our blog for updates and replays, and we'll try and get this one up on the blog within the next week or so. But thank you very much for your time. I'll stay online here for a little bit if you do have any other questions. Thank you very much.